Dust moved across the ancient roads long before anyone understood why certain men and women seemed marked by suffering from the beginning of their lives. Across deserts, valleys, mountain trails, fishing villages, prison cells, caves, foreign kingdoms, and isolated wilderness paths, there appeared a pattern so consistent that it stretched across centuries of biblical history, like an invisible line connecting every chosen figure to the same hidden burden. The pain was rarely visible at first. It remained concealed beneath obedience, hidden beneath responsibility, buried beneath survival, and masked behind the outward appearance of strength. Yet the historical movement of Scripture repeatedly returned to the same reality. Those separated for divine purpose were almost always forced to carry private sorrow, while history unfolded around them. Abraham crossed the dry lands between Mesopotamia and Canaan, carrying promises that sounded larger than the visible world around him. Yet every mile north and west also carried the silent weight of uncertainty. The movement from Ur toward Haran, and eventually toward Canaan, was not merely migration across territory. It was the dismantling of familiarity. Ancient trade routes stretched through hostile terrain, where identity itself could dissolve beneath distance and time. The chosen man walked away from language, memory, protection, and inheritance, entering lands where no visible evidence supported the future he had been promised. Geography became separation. Distance became pain. The maps of Scripture repeatedly reveal that chosen people were often removed from stability before they were entrusted with influence. Joseph traveled unwillingly along another route entirely. The journey from Canaan into Egypt was not a pilgrimage of hope, but a forced descent into humiliation. Caravan roads carried him southward through desert corridors toward one of the most powerful civilizations on earth. Yet the hidden pain was not merely slavery. The deeper wound was invisibility. In Egypt, Joseph became physically alive while emotionally erased. The favored son became unknown in a foreign land. The language changed around him. The architecture changed. The gods changed. The rhythm of life changed. Yet inside the political machinery of Egypt, the chosen man carried a private grief no public authority could remove. Even when elevated inside Pharaoh's administration, dressed in authority and standing near royal power, the earlier wounds remained buried beneath success. Scripture repeatedly shows that chosen individuals often reached visible influence while silently carrying invisible sorrow from earlier seasons. Moses entered another wilderness pattern. His movement from Egypt into Midian marked one of the clearest geographical separations in biblical history. The royal environment of Egypt disappeared behind him as he crossed into barren territory east of the Sinai wilderness. Sand, rock, heat, isolation, and silence replaced palace structures and military order. Midian became a hidden location between identities. Moses was no longer fully Egyptian, yet he remained separated from his Hebrew origin as well. The hidden pain of the chosen frequently emerged in places where identity itself became unstable. For years, Moses disappeared into terrain where almost nothing historically significant appeared to happen. Yet biblical history repeatedly demonstrates that isolation periods were not empty interruptions. They were preparation environments hidden from public view. The chosen often suffered through years where nothing visible validated their purpose. David entered the same pattern across the hills surrounding Bethlehem and the caves near the Dead Sea wilderness. Before crowns, armies, or royal processions appeared, there were isolated fields where sheep moved through silence under open skies. The hidden pain was not simply loneliness, it was misunderstanding. David was chosen before he was recognized. He was appointed before he was elevated. This recurring biblical sequence created deep internal tension. The chosen often carried knowledge about their calling long before their environment reflected it. The geography surrounding David's life reveals repeated movement away from security and toward concealment. From Bethlehem to Adullam, from wilderness strongholds to desert hiding places near En-Gedi, his life unfolded through caves, hills, ravines, and isolated terrain. While Saul remained publicly enthroned inside political centers, David survived among rocks and fugitives. Yet the hidden pain expanded further because the chosen man frequently had to endure attacks from the very structures he was eventually meant to lead. Scripture repeatedly reveals this devastating pattern. The chosen are often wounded by the environments connected to their future assignment. Elijah moved northward through collapsing spiritual territory during one of Israel's darkest periods. The prophet crossed rivers, wilderness paths, isolated valleys, and remote mountain routes, while carrying the exhaustion of confronting national rebellion almost alone. Mount Carmel became one visible moment of victory, but the hidden pain emerged immediately afterward when Elijah fled south into the wilderness beneath the shadow of death itself. The geography matters because Scripture consistently places the emotional breaking points of chosen individuals in isolated terrain. The prophet traveled beyond populated regions into desert silence, where exhaustion stripped away public strength. Chosen individuals often appeared strongest publicly during the exact periods they were collapsing privately. Jeremiah carried another form of hidden suffering. Unlike warriors, kings, or military leaders, his pain unfolded through rejection, ridicule, imprisonment, and emotional isolation inside Jerusalem before its destruction by Babylon. The city itself became a collapsing environment. Streets once associated with covenant identity transformed into places of warning, fear, and approaching catastrophe. Jeremiah walked through gates, courtyards, and prison areas, carrying messages nobody wanted to hear. The hidden pain of the chosen frequently involved seeing reality before everyone else did. Biblical history repeatedly reveals that those appointed to speak truth often suffered because the surrounding culture preferred illusion over warning. Ezekiel experienced the same separation pattern geographically. The movement from Jerusalem toward Babylon through forced exile created one of the greatest historical displacements in Scripture. Entire populations crossed harsh terrain eastward toward foreign domination. Rivers changed, languages changed, governments changed. Sacred geography itself seemed shattered. Yet among displaced captives beside the Kibar River, Ezekiel carried visions while surrounded by national despair. The chosen frequently carried revelation inside environments dominated by confusion. Daniel entered Babylon through another forced relocation. Massive walls, imperial architecture, astronomical learning, political hierarchy, and royal intimidation surrounded him. Yet the hidden pain was not merely exile. It was the pressure of maintaining identity inside systems designed to reshape it. Chosen individuals throughout Scripture repeatedly entered environments attempting to redefine them. Babylon sought to rename, retrain, and absorb young captives into imperial structure. Yet beneath discipline and wisdom remained the silent burden of separation from homeland, familiarity, and inherited tradition. Then history moved toward Galilee, Judea, Samaria, and the wilderness regions surrounding the Jordan River. The roads of Roman-occupied territory became the stage for another recurring pattern. John the Baptist emerged not from political centers, but from wilderness territory east of Jerusalem. The geography itself announced the pattern once again. The chosen voice appeared outside established systems. Desert terrain became preparation ground for prophetic emergence. The hidden pain appeared through separation from ordinary life. Isolation preceded influence. Then Jesus himself moved through villages, coastlines, mountainsides, synagogues, deserts, and Roman-controlled cities while carrying the deepest burden ever placed upon any figure in biblical history. The movement across Galilee toward Jerusalem was not random travel. It was a historical progression towards suffering. Every road eventually pointed toward sacrifice. Crowds surrounded him publicly, while rejection developed quietly beneath the surface. One of the greatest hidden pains carried by chosen individuals throughout Scripture was the reality of being surrounded by people while remaining profoundly alone in purpose. The disciples walked beside him physically, yet repeatedly failed to understand the weight he carried internally. From Caesarea Philippi to the Mount of Olives, the narrative steadily narrowed toward betrayal, abandonment, arrest, and crucifixion. Geography became destiny. The road south toward Jerusalem carried both prophecy and grief simultaneously. The Apostle Paul later crossed enormous sections of the ancient Mediterranean world, carrying another hidden burden. His journey stretched from Jerusalem through Antioch, Asia Minor, Macedonia, Greece, and eventually toward Rome itself. sea routes, prison cells, shipwreck locations, hostile cities, synagogues, marketplaces, and courtrooms formed the geography of his assignment. Yet beneath theological influence and missionary expansion remained constant suffering. Biblical history repeatedly demonstrates that chosen individuals were often required to continue moving while wounded internally. Paul carried physical exhaustion, rejection, imprisonment, betrayal, and loneliness across enormous distances. The hidden pain was not removed simply because the mission continued successfully. This pattern appears repeatedly from Genesis through the New Testament. The chosen were frequently isolated before being elevated, misunderstood before being recognized, wounded before being trusted, and separated before being positioned. Their pain remained hidden because history usually records outcomes more visibly than internal suffering. Yet beneath every major biblical movement existed private grief that few people fully understood. Wilderness roads, prison walls, foreign kingdoms, caves, deserts, mountains, and exile routes became recurring environments where hidden sorrow shaped the individuals later remembered by history. Scripture reveals a difficult reality across centuries of movement and geography. Many of the people most deeply used within biblical history were carrying burdens invisible to nearly everyone around them. Their lives moved across landscapes filled with silence, separation, uncertainty, and endurance long before public recognition ever arrived. The hidden pain did not mean abandonment. The hidden pain became part of the historical journey itself. Night settled over ancient roads, while entire generations slept without understanding that some of the most important moments in biblical history were unfolding inside hidden seasons of emotional suffering. Long before crowns appeared, before victories were recorded, before miracles became public memory, there were years of silence that almost nobody witnessed. Scripture repeatedly moves through deserts, wilderness corridors, foreign territories, and isolated mountains, not merely because these places existed geographically, but because these locations became environments where the hidden pain of the chosen reached its deepest form. The visible story often focused on kingdoms, migrations, battles, prophecies, and movements of nations, yet beneath every major transition stood individuals carrying exhaustion that remained invisible to those around them. Jacob crossed one of the most emotionally significant landscapes in biblical history during his return toward Canaan. The terrain east of the Jordan River became more than geography. It became confrontation with memory itself. Years earlier, Jacob had fled west to east in fear after deception, fractured his relationship with Esau. Now he traveled back through valleys and river crossings, carrying wealth, family, servants, and responsibility. Yet internally he remained haunted by unresolved fear. The hidden pain of the chosen often involved carrying old wounds into new assignments. Scripture repeatedly reveals that divine calling did not erase emotional struggle. The night beside the Jabbok River became one of the clearest images of private suffering in biblical history. While others slept nearby, Jacob wrestled alone through darkness until morning approached. Isolation once again became the setting where internal transformation occurred. Public identity changed only after private breaking. Naomi carried another hidden grief across the dusty roads connecting Moab and Bethlehem. Her return journey westward toward Judah was not triumphant migration. It was survival after devastating loss. The famine that originally drove her family east into Moab had already exposed instability across the region, yet the greater devastation unfolded quietly through death itself. Husband gone, sons gone, future uncertain. The geography surrounding Naomi's life reflects a repeated biblical pattern where chosen individuals often walked back into familiar territory, carrying unbearable sorrow beneath outward composure. Bethlehem eventually became associated with restoration through Ruth's faithfulness. But before restoration came emptiness so severe that Naomi openly described herself as bitter. The chosen frequently reached moments where survival itself became difficult beneath the weight of private suffering. Ruth entered another dimension of hidden pain through displacement. The journey from Moab into Bethlehem was more than relocation. It was complete separation from national identity, language familiarity, and inherited culture. Ruth walked toward uncertainty with no visible guarantee of acceptance. Throughout biblical history, chosen people often moved toward purpose without possessing clear evidence of security ahead of them. The roads of Scripture repeatedly carried individuals away from predictability and toward dependence. Ruth harvested grain in fields beneath the social vulnerability of being foreign, widowed, and unknown. Yet hidden beneath ordinary labor was a historical movement shaping future generations, eventually connecting to the lineage of David himself. The chosen frequently lived through seasons that appeared ordinary, while history quietly shifted around them. Hannah carried hidden suffering without crossing massive geographical distances, yet the emotional terrain surrounding her life became equally severe. In ancient Shiloh, where worship centered around the tabernacle before the establishment of Jerusalem as Israel's spiritual center, Hannah entered sacred space, carrying unbearable grief. Public gatherings often intensified private pain because the surrounding culture viewed childlessness through shame and misunderstanding. The chosen frequently suffered wounds invisible to communities focused only on outward appearance. Hannah prayed through silent anguish, while others misinterpreted her condition completely. Scripture repeatedly demonstrates that hidden pain often remained unseen even within religious environments. Before Samuel ever emerged as prophet and judge over Israel, there was a woman weeping quietly near sacred ground, while almost nobody understood her suffering. Job entered perhaps the most devastating portrait of hidden pain anywhere in biblical literature. The geography surrounding his life reflected collapse, open land, destroyed property, wilderness raiders, windstorms, disease, and ash-covered ground formed the environment where his suffering unfolded. Yet one of the deepest wounds was not physical loss itself. It was isolation inside incomprehensible pain. Friends arrived physically yet failed emotionally. They spoke beside him while completely misunderstanding him. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout biblical history. Chosen individuals often suffered not only from hardship itself, but from being misunderstood during hardship. Job sat among ruins carrying grief too large for ordinary explanation. His story revealed that suffering could exist even when no visible evidence justified it. The hidden pain became the struggle of remaining faithful, while answers remained absent. Centuries later, another hidden suffering unfolded across the villages surrounding Nazareth. Mary carried enormous emotional weight beneath ordinary daily life, long before public ministry ever emerged. The geography of Galilee during Roman occupation reflected tension, taxation, military oversight, and political instability. Yet within small villages, ordinary routines continued beneath imperial pressure. Mary lived inside this environment, while carrying knowledge few people around her could fully comprehend. Scripture repeatedly shows that chosen individuals were often entrusted with burdens impossible to explain publicly. Silence became protection. Endurance became necessary. Joseph, the earthly guardian of Jesus, carried another hidden burden through obedience without recognition. He protected his family across dangerous roads leading toward Egypt during Herod's violent reign. The movement southward away from Bethlehem toward foreign territory repeated another ancient biblical pattern: preservation through exile. Egypt once again became refuge during crisis. Yet Joseph's suffering unfolded quietly through responsibility, uncertainty, and sacrifice without public honor attached to his role. Many chosen individuals throughout Scripture carried critical assignments while remaining largely unrecognized by surrounding society. The disciples later entered their own hidden suffering as they moved through Roman-controlled territory, following Jesus from region to region. Galilee, Samaria, Judea, the Decapolis, and Jerusalem each exposed them to increasing pressure. Yet one of the greatest hidden pains emerged after they realized the path ahead led directly towards suffering rather than political victory. The expectation of earthly triumph gradually collapsed beneath the reality of sacrifice. Scripture repeatedly demonstrates that chosen individuals often endured the painful destruction of their own expectations before fully understanding their purpose. Peter carried this burden intensely, bold publicly, unstable privately. He moved through moments of confidence and fear almost simultaneously. The roads leading toward Jerusalem became roads leading toward internal exposure. The chosen frequently discovered their own weakness during the exact seasons history remembered them as strong. Thomas carried hidden pain through uncertainty and fear. Matthew carried the social isolation attached to his former profession. John carried the future burden of witnessing crucifixion before later enduring exile on Patmos. Each disciple walked physically beside the Messiah while internally struggling with fear, confusion, and incomplete understanding. Scripture reveals that proximity to divine purpose did not eliminate emotional suffering. In many cases, it intensified it. After the resurrection and ascension, the geographical spread of early Christianity created another chapter of hidden pain. Believers moved through hostile cities, underground gatherings, prison systems, and dangerous trade routes while carrying a message spreading faster than political systems could contain it. Yet behind the expansion stood exhausted individuals enduring persecution, separation from family, economic instability, and constant uncertainty. The Apostle John eventually arrived on Patmos, a rocky island in the Aegean Sea associated with exile and isolation. Geography again became deeply symbolic. Revelation emerged not from comfort, but from separation. Throughout Scripture, some of the clearest moments of vision appeared during seasons of loneliness. The chosen were repeatedly removed from distraction before receiving clarity. Even after miraculous moments, hidden pain remained present. Elijah still battled despair after Mount Carmel. Peter still carried shame after denial. Paul still described ongoing weakness despite enormous influence. Timothy still struggled with fear while leading believers. Biblical history consistently refuses to present chosen individuals as emotionally untouched heroes. Instead, Scripture reveals men and women carrying profound internal battles while continuing to move forward through history. This realism gives biblical narratives their enduring weight. The hidden pain was never merely emotional decoration added to the story. It shaped the story itself. Entire movements across deserts, kingdoms, mountains, rivers, and foreign empires were influenced by individuals carrying sorrow privately, while responsibility expanded publicly. The maps of Scripture reveal repeated movement through isolation because chosen individuals were often separated from comfort before participating in larger historical purpose. Wilderness routes, exile roads, prison corridors, and hidden caves appear constantly because biblical history repeatedly unfolded through seasons where suffering prepared individuals for responsibilities they could not yet fully understand. The chosen often looked abandoned before history finally revealed the meaning behind their endurance. Behind every visible moment, remembered by generations, stood earlier years of hidden grief, known fully only by God Himself. Morning light eventually reached the ancient landscapes, where generations before had walked through silence, carrying burdens almost nobody understood. The deserts remained. The ruined cities remained. The prison stones, mountain paths, wilderness caves, Roman roads, fishing villages, and exile territories all remained scattered across history, like witnesses to a pattern repeated from Genesis until the final pages of Scripture. The hidden pain of the chosen was never confined to one era, one prophet, one kingdom, or one covenant. It appeared repeatedly because the movement of biblical history itself unfolded through people forced to endure private suffering while participating in events larger than themselves. Across centuries, the chosen often stood between visible reality and invisible purpose, carrying emotional weight that rarely disappeared even after victories arrived. The final movements of biblical history reveal this pattern with increasing intensity. Jerusalem during the 1st century stood under Roman occupation, crowded during feast seasons. Politically unstable, spiritually divided, and filled with tension beneath outward routine. Massive stone structures dominated the city skyline, while pilgrims traveled from distant regions through Judea toward the temple courts. Yet within this environment of religious activity and imperial control, hidden suffering quietly intensified among those carrying the message of the kingdom. After the resurrection of Jesus, the disciples did not suddenly become untouched by fear or pain. Instead, they entered a world where responsibility expanded faster than stability. The same streets that once echoed with celebration during Passover soon became dangerous territory marked by arrests, surveillance, threats, and violent opposition. The chosen repeatedly discovered that purpose often increased pressure rather than removing it. Peter moved through Jerusalem carrying memories that never fully disappeared. The denial before crucifixion became part of his internal history forever. Even after restoration and leadership emerged publicly, the hidden pain remained buried beneath responsibility. Scripture consistently shows that chosen individuals carried scars into their future assignments rather than escaping them completely. The wounds became reminders of weakness, dependence, survival, and mercy. Peter preached boldly before crowds, yet beneath the public strength stood the memory of fear beside a fire during the darkest night of his life. The hidden pain did not disqualify him. It followed him into leadership. Paul's journeys reveal the same pattern across a massive geographical scale. From Antioch through Cyprus, Asia Minor, Macedonia, Athens, Corinth, Ephesus, Caesarea, and finally toward Rome, the apostle crossed enormous sections of the ancient world under constant strain. Roman roads connected cities efficiently, yet those same roads also carried him repeatedly toward imprisonment, hostility, exhaustion, and danger. Every region presented different forms of pressure. In some cities, rejection came through mockery. In others, violence erupted openly. In others, betrayal emerged from within communities themselves. Yet beneath the expansion of early Christianity stood a man carrying ongoing suffering almost everywhere he traveled. Biblical history repeatedly reveals that chosen individuals were often required to continue moving while emotionally and physically wounded. The hidden pain became part of the mission itself. Even success brought new burdens. Churches expanded, but responsibility multiplied. Influence grew, yet loneliness increased. Paul frequently wrote from confinement, isolation, or exhaustion, while still carrying concern for communities spread across distant territories. His letters reveal a man constantly strengthening others, while enduring enormous pressure privately. John's exile on Patmos became one of the final great wilderness settings of Scripture. The island stood isolated within the Aegean Sea, separated from mainland political life and distant from the churches connected to his ministry. Yet once again, biblical history demonstrates that isolation often preceded revelation. The chosen repeatedly encountered clarity in environments stripped of distraction. Patmos was rocky, remote, and restrictive, yet it became the setting where one of the most sweeping visions in biblical history unfolded. The hidden pain of separation became intertwined with prophetic vision concerning kingdoms, judgment, endurance, and eternity itself. Scripture repeatedly presents this paradox. Some of the deepest revelations emerged during seasons that externally appeared empty, restrictive, or painful. Throughout biblical history, chosen individuals rarely understood the full meaning of their suffering while living through it. Abraham never saw the complete future connected to his journey westward from Ur. Joseph could not fully understand Egypt while imprisoned inside it. Moses could not see the future nation while isolated in Midian. David could not imagine the future kingdom while hiding among caves. Jeremiah could not see restoration while Jerusalem collapsed around him. The disciples could not understand resurrection while standing beneath the horror of crucifixion. The hidden pain frequently involved incomplete understanding. The chosen often carried responsibility without possessing the full picture behind it. Geography played a critical role in this recurring pattern. Scripture continually moved through deserts because deserts exposed dependence. It moved through mountains because mountains separated individuals from ordinary life. It moved through exile because exile stripped away false security. It moved through wilderness because wilderness revealed what remained when comfort disappeared. The chosen repeatedly encountered God in locations where human control weakened. The hidden pain became intertwined with separation from stability, familiarity, and visible certainty. Yet biblical history also reveals another reality, hidden beneath the suffering itself. The isolated roads eventually connected to larger movements. The private grief eventually intersected with historical transformation. The caves, prisons, deserts, rivers, and foreign territories became stages where endurance quietly shaped the future. Joseph's prison eventually connected to preservation during famine. Moses' wilderness years eventually connected to the Exodus. David's isolation eventually connected to national leadership. Esther's hidden fear inside Persia eventually connected to survival for an entire people. Paul's imprisonments eventually produced letters influencing generations across continents and centuries. Scripture repeatedly demonstrates that hidden pain was often occurring simultaneously with hidden preparation. Yet the preparation rarely felt meaningful while the suffering itself unfolded. This is why biblical narratives carry such enduring emotional power across time. They do not present chosen individuals as untouched figures floating above hardship. Instead, they present men and women walking through real terrain under real pressure while carrying invisible sorrow. They grew tired, they feared, they grieved, they doubted, they endured isolation, they experienced betrayal. They carried responsibilities heavier than those around them fully understood, yet history continued moving through them anyway. The final pattern emerging across Scripture is not the elimination of suffering, but endurance through it. The chosen were not always removed from pain. Many walked directly through it for years. Some died before seeing the visible outcome connected to their obedience. Hebrews later described individuals who carried promises without fully receiving the earthly completion of what they hoped for. This reveals one of the deepest realities hidden inside biblical history. Many chosen people participated in movements larger than their own lifetime. Their pain often existed within stories extending far beyond themselves. The roads they walked became part of future generations they would never personally meet. The hidden pain shaped endurance. Endurance shaped character. Character shaped history. From Eden's exile to Babylon's captivity, from Sinai's wilderness to Patmos's isolation, Scripture consistently reveals a world where chosen individuals carried private sorrow while history unfolded publicly around them. The hidden pain was not evidence of abandonment. It was often evidence that their lives had become connected to responsibilities extending beyond ordinary existence. Across mountains, deserts, valleys, rivers, foreign kingdoms, storm-covered seas, and ancient roads, the chosen walked forward, carrying burdens few people could see. Yet through those hidden struggles, biblical history itself continued unfolding across time and terrain, one painful step at a time.